EduMagicians, welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
Hi, I'm Dennis Sheeran.
And I'm Raymond Steinmetz from the Instant Relevance Podcast. And we're part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey EduMagicians, it's Sam, and before we start into this episode, I want to share with you about an amazing resource. It's called the Educator Candidate Member Portal. AAEE provides you with resources such as virtual job fairs, a job board, interview tips and prep, resume building, webinars. You can even get a copy of the Job Search Handbook digitally. So head on over to aaee.org and create your free Educator Candidate Member account today. Friends, one more thing before we get started. This episode is brought to you by my new course, Digital Portfolios from Scratch to Interview Ready. Head on over to sfessich.com/courses for more information about this self-paced, hands-on virtual workshop. EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. Today, I have with me Leanna Malinowsky, and we have met over Instagram. She's been a virtual co-op for me, and she also is a contributing author to the New Teacher's Guide to Overcoming Common Challenges. She actually has 2 chapters in that book. If you haven't grabbed it already, head on over to Amazon and grab your copy, especially if you're a graduate. This is a fantastic resource for new and first beginning year teachers. Leanna, welcome to the show again.
Thank you for having me back. I am so excited to be here today.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have you on. And friends, today we're going to be talking about, this is kind of like a special ed 101 recap type session for those of you who are going into interviews. You're going to be asked questions related to special education. So Leanna's going to come and share with us all she knows about some of these common questions that you might be asked during your interview related to special education. But before we jump in there, Leanna, we have to know your teaching story. So could you please share with us why you got into education, and then specifically, why did you choose special ed as your career path?
Yes, sure. I'd love to share that. For me, I know so many people that said, I played teacher when I was a kid and I knew I wanted to be a teacher all my life. And for me, that wasn't exactly true. I'm airing a little secret, but I actually set out at first to be a dance major in college, and I wanted to either do dance therapy or to own my own dance studio. So I guess in that sense, I did want to be a teacher, just I didn't think traditional classroom, right? So one thing led to another with an injury, and I said, if I can't be a dance major, if I can't have that be my solo career, I have to teach something, because I know I wanted to work with children. And especially with dance therapy, I wanted to work with children who had special needs. And that came about pairing with, at the time, my mother worked for a school where there was children with all different types of special needs. And I did some volunteering there one day. And I remember it was a summer day, it was a summer program, and they had me work with this little girl who had cerebral palsy. And we were working with a dot bottle, and she was smiling, and I was interacting with her. And my mother told me later on, the teacher said, your daughter's going to go to college for special education, right? And my mother said, no, she's, junior going in senior year. She just got accepted to her first choice art school. What are you talking about? She said, she's going to be a special ed teacher. And that really did come back to haunt me, because they say if you have that calling to be a teacher, you end up being a teacher, like it or not.
It's going to find you.
It's going to find you. And it did. So, an extra year of schooling and a little extra hard work put into it later, I transferred over into Kane University in Union, New Jersey. And I joined the special education program, and I absolutely loved my experience there as an undergraduate, so much so I returned for my first master's program there in instruction and curriculum development. And then I went back for my postmaster's there as a reading specialist. So as I continued through my special education journey, I realized, and hopefully we'll get into some of this today a little bit, there are certain areas of special education that you might, fall more in love with than others. Mine is, reading and reading disabilities. So it took a few extra steps, but I found my way and I don't regret a thing. I absolutely love what I do and I love the students I work with.
I love that powerful story, how you're going into college for one thing and you come out with a different degree, you come out with a master's. I think that's incredible. And Leanna, you're also working with KDP at Keene University. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I am serving as the associate counselor for the Delta Rho chapter of Kappa Delta Pi, which is the International Honor Society of Education. And I work with the pre-service teachers on campus at Keene who are journeying through their undergraduate or graduate experience, and we even have some doctoral students in the program. So I'm helping them as they make their way through their teaching journey at whatever step they are. And I absolutely love working with my chapter. We are an award-winning chapter with the Honor Society, and we try to help them, the student teachers, make their way through their student teacher internships, and then help them even as they are full teachers in the classroom. We always tell them your membership doesn't end when you graduate. That's when you're going to need the most support. So
Right.
Come back with us and we'll help you through those tough first 3 to 4 years. And as time goes on, our members are really sort of latching on saying, yeah, we need the support. So we're glad to be there for them.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great support for those new teachers. We know they need support, and having that familiarity is really helpful, I'm sure.
Yes, definitely.
All right, friends, we are going to be doing a special ed 101 review session today with Leanna. So let's get right into our questions. So let's start off very basic. What is special education?
Yes. I said I chose special education in a different form and I got into it. But, to me, special education to me is specialized instruction. And this is instruction that we use to tailor to meet the needs of our students. And I always say, the secret is I think we're all special educators because even if you don't have a designated class with the label on it, you're the special ed class this year, you're going to have students that are so diverse and have many abilities in your class. And I like to use the word abilities instead of disabilities. And I like to use the words learning diversities in my class. So you're going to have students, whether you're that teacher or not, that are struggling, right? And you're going to have those students that are excelling and need that challenge. So to me, special education is just meeting the needs of those learners with all those learning diversities. And, in that what we call the FAPE, the free, appropriate public education setting. So there's one of the acronyms. Special ed is full of acronyms, so I'll be trying to today. But it's, with the FAPE, the free appropriate public education, with the range of services that we can provide.
So, friends, we're talking about special ed, and we know that special ed has a lot of acronyms, like Leanna said. For this episode, I will be creating a little freebie that has all the acronyms to go along with our conversation today. I think our first acronym of the day is FAPE, Free and Appropriate Public Education. And I think that's an important piece when we talk about special education, because our students need to be included as much as possible with their typically developing peers at no cost to the families. They're getting the supports, the services, the education that they deserve to be successful in the classroom and to be as independent as possible. Leanna, anything else you want to add to that before we hop into our next question?
I like to add that in special education, and whether you're taking classes right now or serving as a teacher, as a special educator, I always say it's important when you think of special education to focus on the strengths of your students as well as their challenges, because those strengths are what you're going to build the foundation of your teaching on. And you're going to notice those, small moments and those little modalities that they have that you can really grow their personalized program with, or tailor something to have them, like you said, meet their needs, but yet be as independent as possible, because that's really the goal, in my opinion, of special education. It's to provide the supports for the students so they don't need us. The goal is for them to get rid of us as teachers. As much as we want to be there and hold their hand, I always try to challenge them a little bit and say, try to do it without me first, or give them the supports they need to be independent. So I think independence really has been a solid focal point of my personal definition for special ed.
So when we get our students into special education, there's a whole process for that. And we know that it's not based on one assessment, one observation. It's actually a whole process for for students to receive special education. Would you mind diving into that a little bit?
Yes, sure. I'm involved with this process at my school currently, and I have been since, I think it was around 2012 or 2013, that school year. Again, going to throw a couple acronyms out there. I currently serve on our school-based committee called the I&RS team, Intervention and Referral Services team. And in different schools and in different districts, this acronym may be different, or it may be something slightly tweaked, but the purpose of this committee is when teachers notice a student is struggling in class with something, and it can be anything from academics to behavior or emotional. It could be any sort of thing that a teacher has a concern about with a student. They come to this committee and they have to fill out a report. They have to fill out a narrative, giving some information and giving some data, some facts, like say their current test scores or their report card grades. And we meet with the teacher, and then we meet with the family, and we discuss, some of the challenges that the student is having. And we put into plan what we call an action plan. We have some goals, we have some strategies, and we help the teacher and the family give some extra supports to the student. And after about 6 weeks, we meet again. And after a certain period of time of meetings, if we notice that, there's something that's just not clicking yet, or the student is still really struggling with something, that's when we go to our next phase or our next step, which would be to consider talking to the CST or child study team. And that's where I think I like to say the foundational step of special education might begin, because the child study team will then start to conduct some assessments for the student. There'll be a psychological component, of course, an educational component, a family background component. And then we can further determine from there, what can we do in the classroom to help the student, again, reach independence, be happy and not be frustrated, and reach their goals successfully for the year. So I know I kind of left out some details, but it's basically that in a nutshell. I want to try to keep everybody with us in the podcast and not be overwhelmed. So those are the basic steps that we take. And then from there, when the child comes back into the classroom, well, they never left, but when they come into the classroom, if we have to adjust some supports, if they need extra support in reading, they might get that through what we call the RTI or MTS model, response intervention model. They might need extra pull-out support for reading, or they might need some support from a paraprofessional in the class. So we try to adjust that along the way once those determinations have been made. So that's it in a nutshell.
Let's go right into you talk about making adjustments that might be needed to help the student be as successful as possible. Could you talk about what those adjustments could be? I know we have some terminology around that: adaptations, accommodations, modifications. Can you talk about what those are? Any examples, and how they are different types of adjustments that you can make, or types of adaptations that you can make. So what are they, and what are some examples that you can give us related to some of that terminology?
Yes, I could probably talk about this forever. I think I geek out on this too much. My co-teacher and I are always discussing, especially in these new learning environments these days, what adjusting our teaching looks like. But so I like to think of it as two separate types of interventions that we can provide. Accommodations, I like to think those are the hows. How are we teaching? How are we presenting information? How is the student having access to information? And modifications, think about that base word modify in there. Those are the what's, what are we changing in order for our curriculum to be accessible to students? The best example that I love to use, because reading is near and dear to my heart, you might have a student who is who has dyslexia or having trouble reading, and you're reading a novel in your second grade classroom. I use second grade because that's the grade I teach. So you might have the student who is ready to approach that novel, is ready to have those comprehension questions and talk about them, but he or she might need to have an audio version of the book. That's how they're going to be successful. You're accommodating how they're accessing that book. So they can listen to it. Their peers will be reading it. They can listen to it. Or you might have a peer simply read parts of it to them and they can listen to that. It's such a great way to have the students support one another. A modification would be, when you become a teacher, you have to do something what we call guided reading levels. That's a whole other podcast, so I won't go into that too much, but you have to assess where your students are at. And there's different programs and there's different methods that you can do to have either a Lexile score or some sort of letter or a number that'll tell you where they're at on a scale. So if a student is not ready to read that sort of text, you might have a different version of the story or a similar story, but it has high interest, but the readability factor is a little bit different. So you're modifying the curriculum. They're not reading the same thing as their peers, but it's something that will have them be excited to read, and it's approachable, and they can do most of it on their own. So again, modifications are how we're teaching. Accommodations rather, are how we're teaching or how we're presenting information. The modifications are adjusting the what so the student can be successful. And that's how I always like to think about it when I'm doing my lesson planning or I'm planning a unit of study. I'm always pulling in these extra resources to focus on both how can I fix the hows and the what's.
I would also add to accommodations the wheres and the whens, because we can also accommodate where the student maybe takes the test. Maybe they take it in a quieter space, or scheduling and timing, like when do they take this test, or when do they do this assessment so they have extra time. I would also add to those accommodations the where, the when, the hows. I love how you split them up like that. And the modifications are the what's. I think that's really cool. I love that.
Yes.
So we can find these adaptations in a document called an IEP, right?
Yes, another acronym.
Yes, acronym. I think we're at number 6, maybe. So could you please explain to us what an IEP is? And there's lots of different parts of an IEP. What are some things we can find, and what are some things that we can be looking for so we can best serve our students in the classroom?
Yes. So if you're a teacher in a classroom where a student has an IEP or an individualized education plan, I like to think of it as that's their personal menu, right? That is their legal document. So you know what you as a teacher are expected to provide to them within the classroom. And again, it's their plan for their experience in your classroom and in school in general. This could also be with different related arts teachers, all of your teachers that are on your team, and I like to call them instructional teams. Everyone that's on your instructional team, if you have obviously a music teacher or a speech therapist, or if you have an intervention teacher or an ESL teacher, everyone that works with that student needs to be aware of this document, because the expectation is that we follow it and that we provide what's in it. Some things that you can find in it, obviously there's some, but not limited to, are related services. You might have a student who has a speech language delay and needs to have pullout services for speech twice a week. So you'll find different narratives within that, what the goals are for speech, their present level of academic performance or their PLAS. Another acronym. And so you'll know what the speech therapist is working on. And then in the classroom, say you're working on phonics sounds, and there's a specific sound in that document that the speech therapist will be working on, you too can work on that in class as well. Um, Other things that you might find in there are different goals that the student will meet academically for your reading, your math, how much support the student will receive. They might have push-in support. You might even be in a co-teaching situation like I am, where your co-teacher, who is the special education teacher in the general education classroom, he or she has expectations. They have to meet with them a certain amount of times per week. So you'll know as a gen ed teacher, if that's the role you're serving in, how many times per week your co-teacher will be working with those students. Or just if you're the special education teacher, how many times a week you have to serve them. So there's many different components. Some IEPs that I've seen have been up to like 100 pages long if they grow over time. So don't be overwhelmed by the size or how much you see in there. My first advice to anyone who's seeing an IEP for the first time is to take your time. Just like we would say to our students, read it in small chunks, take notes, pull out those important things that you think affect you as the teacher the most, and, really sort of zone in onto the parts that you know that you have to meet in the IEP.
So we've talked about what special education is, the whole process of special ed. We talked about an IEP, but there's another document called a 504 plan. And I know that this is a very common interview question. What is the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP?
I like to think of a 504 plan as a blueprint of how the school is going to support the student to remove those barriers for learning. A 504 plan to me is a little bit more generalized, and it gives a list of accommodations and things that we can do in the classroom to support the student. It's definitely not as detailed as a full IEP would be. For example, the student might need some sort of physical support doing something, or they might need extra time to take a test. So those are different things that we can implement within the classroom. And believe it or not, students aren't the only ones to have a 504 plan. I actually have one myself because I need to wear my sneakers because of my injury on my foot. So, even though there's a dress code at school for me, I'm allowed to wear my sneakers on days where I'm having trouble with my injury. And, they have to allow that. So, same thing it would be for a student who needs some sort of additional support. And again, it could include some different services and changes to the learning environment. But again, I think just like an IEP, the goal is independence. I think that doesn't change no matter what document we're looking at. We still want the student to be as independent as possible.
Absolutely. Helping them be as independent as possible is definitely the goal of that IEP of the 504 plan. You had talked earlier about co-teaching, Leanna. Can you share a little bit about what that is and what to expect in a co-teaching type situation?
Yes, I did forget one thing really quick for the
Sure.
for the 504 plan. It just slipped my mind. Some of the eligibility requirements for a 504 plan might be different. So again, it's very important to, as the leader sometimes of the instructional team, to be in touch with the family and your child's study team to know what eligibility requirements the student needs. But yes, co-teaching, one of my favorite topics. I've been very blessed the past few years to have an amazing co-teacher. If you do have students in your classroom who have learning diversities, you might very well be paired up with another teacher. And if you're the special education teacher, you might be in the general education classroom. And like myself, if you're the general education teacher, you might have a special education teacher in the classroom. And co-teaching, I think, to different people means something a little bit different. And I have heard stories where either party says, I'm the gen ed teacher, this is my classroom, you help your students, and it's there, it's done. The special education teacher says, these are my students, I will only work with my students, and it's done. I don't find that to be helpful for anyone, adults, students. I don't find that to be helpful at all. To me, co-teaching is really getting to know your partner. If you're going to be spending all day in the classroom with little ones or big kids, you really have to get to know one another and build that relationship just like you would with your students, and really find a way to interweave your teaching together. And one of my most favorite and most impactful mentors I've had in my teaching career when I first started out. I worked in her classroom for part of my student teaching experience. She told me, in a classroom where there's students who have learning diversities and you have a co-teacher or you have paras, even paraprofessionals, you should be able to walk into that classroom and not tell who the teacher is, the gen ed teacher or the main classroom teacher, because everybody should be working with every student, giving them what they need, providing them their services, knowing the students, knowing what they need and how they work. And I found that to be so true. So co-teaching to me is sharing the responsibility for all the students in the class and giving them the supports they need to be successful. And for example, in my classroom, there were times where, prior to our new learning environments with COVID, but I would be in the front showing, a different math problem on the board to one group while my co-teacher was in the back showing a different word problem to a different group. There would be times I would be up in the front and we would all be working on the same problem and he would be walking around and assisting the students. There would be times where he would be in the front showing a math problem and I would be walking around giving the supports. So at different times, you're sharing the responsibility of wearing both hats of the general education and special education teacher. So co-teaching to me is just that relationship that you develop so you can have the best running classroom that you can.
That is such a beautiful description of co-teaching. And friends, if you want more information about co-teaching, I put down in our show notes the link to our co-teaching episode on the podcast with New Jersey Teacher to Teacher, Darlene and Nicole. So you can check out all the different types of co-teaching as well, because there are 6 different models. You might want to brush up on those for your next interview. Leanna, before we end out today, I would love for you to share some tips for our future special ed teachers that you have learned over the years or things that maybe you wish you learned before you went into a career in special education.
Yes. I think the first thing I would want anyone to know as you're entering the classroom or you're continuing through your teaching journey for being a special education teacher is know that you won't know everything. It is impossible to know everything. I have been a teacher for over 13 years and I still sometimes forget and I blank out on acronyms, right? I have to think about it. There's always something new. Education in general is always changing. It's always growing. It's always developing. So with that understanding that you won't know everything, always keep learning. I don't just say this as a reading specialist and I love to read, but you can't read enough. The more you read, the more you research, the more you network and talk with other people, the more you're going to learn and grow. And I think as teachers, whether we are general education teachers, special education teachers, that is so vital. It's a vital lifeline to us and to our industry because we have to keep up with everything that's growing and changing. So always keep learning, always keep networking. My tip would be, on the first day in your classroom, you're not going to know your students, and that is okay. You're going to get to know them. And for my early educators out there, one special piece of advice for sure. You might say to yourself, I see this student struggling, or the student is having some difficult behaviors, displaying some, difficult emotions. And I'm still new, right? No one will believe me. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. Of course, we have to act professional and we have to, put our best foot forward. But your students, even if it's your first year, you're in the classroom with them. Do not be afraid to go to your principal or go to your INRS team or another teacher. You hopefully will be paired up with a mentor. Talk with them about it and say, these are the things that I'm noticing. With that, make sure you have documentation. 3 times per week this week, the student was struggling with this. Ask for advice and don't be afraid to ask for advice, but don't be afraid to stand up for your students, because if we don't, who will? Right? We have to really advocate for our students. And I think sometimes early educators have that little hesitation to do that. So definitely reach out to the veteran teachers. They'll help you through it. And like I said, you will get to know your students. And I always joke around. I said, boy, my first few years, I feel bad for the students I didn't service properly because I made so many mistakes. But that comes with the territory, and you're going to continue to grow and be the best teacher that you can be for your students.
Absolutely. I love how you shared tips like for our beginning educators and for our students who are for our new teachers who are getting into classrooms in September. Leanna, this has been an amazing conversation. Let me just recap it for us really quick for our listeners. So I love how you shared at the beginning how we are all special educators. We are all reaching and teaching students, taking responsibility for our students in the classroom. And I love the information you gave about the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP, what we can find in an IEP, and what the process of special education is, from noticing something to making sure our students are receiving the services that they need and deserve in the classroom. You also shared about adaptations, accommodations, modifications, accommodations being the hows, the wheres, and the whys, and the modifications being the whats. I love how you separated those two. Those were great. And then we closed out our conversation with some tips for co-teaching and building that relationship with our co-teacher, how it's all of our students, not yours, not mine, it's our students. Now, Leanna, I know my listeners are going to want to contact you. How can we get in touch with you and find you? And also learn more about your the book that you was a contributing author for, The New Teacher Guide to Overcoming Common Challenges.
Yes, sure. There's a few ways to reach me. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and Instagram. It's the same. It's at Ms. Malinowsky, MS, and then it's my last name, which is Malinowsky, Ms. Malinowsky. You can reach out to me there, send me a personal message. I'd love to connect with you. You can also find me on Facebook. I know some people don't really use Facebook that much anymore, but it's my full name, Leanna Malinowsky, on Facebook. And there's a lot of great communities out there, which is why I hung on to Facebook. So if you reach out to me there and give me a personal message, I'd be glad to share my email and personal information so we can continue to have those personal conversations and I can give support. As far as the book, I know it has been advertised on social media, but if you visit the website kdp.org, which is the website for Kappa Delta Pi, the International Honor Society for Education, it's there and it's available through Routledge, so you can purchase it there as well. So, and if you can't find it or need help, just reach out and I'll help you find it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leanna. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me again.
And there you have it, EduMagicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more EduMagic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram at sfessage. Until next time, you have the EduMagic within you.